everybody, John Wood here, and as promised, today I'm going to do a video featuring the Scimitar Shrimp. This is the second in a group of weedless saltwater flats flies. This was partially developed with a friend of mine. You'll know him as Nick Fly Fishing on Instagram and Facebook. I know him as the Marsh Ninja, or just plain old Nick. We started out and I designed a fly called the Scimitar Minnow, which has got a big silver eye on it, imitates a minnow. And during a conversation one day, he said, you know, you should turn this into a shrimp, because he was seeing a lot of shrimp down there on the flats in Texas, where he fishes down around Matagorda. And so we went back and forth, talked about it, and this is what we eventually came up with, this little fly right here. And I'm going to show you how to tie it. First thing I'm going to do is go through the materials so that you know what you need to get started. The hook that I've settled on that I really like is the Umpqua XS 420. The package here is a 1/0. The one I'm going to tie today, though, is a size 1. You can do it in either size. These are plenty big enough hooks to hook a redfish or speckled trout. You can just tie the ones with the 1/0. You can tie them a little bit longer so that the entire length is about pushing 3 inches, about 2 3/4, because that's about the most you're going to be able to get the length for this deer hair, which we use for the back. The thread I use is a Uni 6/0 in pink, and the reason I use this 6/0 is because it's got enough strength to hold everything in place, and it's got a small enough diameter so it doesn't build a lot of unnecessary bulk, because it's very critical how all the materials are stacked on there so that they lay the way that they're supposed to. The body uses, on this particular fly, 3 different colors of Cascade Crest Tools Cct Fiber. And this is a really cool material, and I'm going to show you how to prep it before we get started in the actual tying. The antenna on this, or I'm not sure where the package is, this is a Crystal Flash in Bonefish Tan. Now don't get too caught up in the colors on these things, because you can change the colors to match whatever you want. And the legs that you see sticking out here, and which also create the segmentation on the bottom, that is just a tan polar chenille from Hairline. It's all very simple, and we're also going to use some Solarez doming resin. You can use the thick hard, the flex, whatever you've got on hand. Just need to make sure that the thin runs a little bit too fast, and you'll have troubles with that. I tried it in the beginning, and when you're putting it on there, it wants to run down the sides, and it gathers up the legs so that they don't have the movement that they need in the water. And then the back on this is going to be just the center. You can see where I've cut it out here from a natural bucktail. So before we get started, let's prep all of our materials, and I'm going to start with the bucktail. Get that out of the vise so you can see what I'm doing here. And I'm just going to take and pull up a clump of this right out of the center, and it's a pretty substantial clump. The reason I'm getting this much, we're not going to use that much, but I'm going to have to groom out all of the short hairs that won't be long enough, because I want to stack the ends, because you can see on that one fly, and we will see it later when we get it, the center hair on these bucktails have a dark tip to them, and when you stack them all together, it allows you to have a dark spot right at the end, which kind of imitates the eyes on a shrimp. So we get that without having to add another material and create another step in the tying process. So I've got a pretty good clump here. Load it into my stacker. And if I'm doing multiples of these, I've got 4 stackers that I use. And And I like to go ahead and load every one of them up and get them all loaded up. So I don't have to stop on each fly and do this. You can see that's not quite evened up yet. So I'm going to brush it again. Get a few more of those shorter hairs out of there so it'll stack a little bit better. There we go. Plus, it's pretty dry here in Billings today, even though it's snowing outside. So, don't have a whole lot of humidity, and it's creating some static for me. So, I'll get that in there. Get that stacked really good. And this is still a little bit more hair than I'm actually going to use in the end. You can see it's still quite a bit. But like I said, when I get right to the point of cutting it, it's going to end up having some of the shorter ones come out. I'm having a little trouble getting that stacked the way I want, so I'll trim the ends, and that usually helps a little bit. There we go. Oh yeah. That's going to be good and even, and we'll stack it one more time just before we put it on there, just for good measure. Now, the next thing we're going to do is prep our materials. For this size 1 hook, I'm going to use just one strand of white. And you can see how this material is packaged. It's a whole bunch of strands, and each strand has one wrap around it, one fiber wrapped around it to control it and keep the bundles separated. And I really like this over, say, something like Widow's Web or EP fibers, because I can really closely control how much of the material I'm putting on there, so that I can tell exactly what the sink rate on this thing is going to be without having to test it out. When you're using the EP or the Widow's Web or something like that, and you get just a little bit too much on there, you can slow your sink rate down. You get too little on there, and you can speed the sink rate up, and it's sinking too fast. Now the middle, I'm going to use 2 strands of pink, and then for the back, we'll use 2 strands of tan. Get that around there where I can handle it a little better. There we go. Alright. So, because it's got that binding wrap on it, and I'm not sure you can see it, but right here it's gathered. And if I just take my bodkin and push it through there, you'll see it kind of locks. That's that binding wrap. I want to get that off of there so all of these fibers will open up and they'll just move freely. So I've got my little brush here, and this is a grout brush that you can get at a home improvement store, and it's pretty stiff. It's much stiffer than a toothbrush would be, although I've used a toothbrush until I started using this. And I'm just brushing those fibers. And if you get a really tough binding wrap, because sometimes they'll lock up when you're doing this, take that and wrap it around your finger like that right there, so that you're not going to end up pulling fibers out, misaligning everything. Do one end of it and then do the other end. We're just gently stroking that stuff out. So now you can see those fibers are nice and open. Now I'm going to do the pink. Now my preferred way to do this is on my leg, on my pants, so you won't be able to see this, but I'm doing the same thing I was there, and I'm just brushing that out. I know that probably looks a little funky, but you can see I've just brushed that out. I've still got one binding wrap right there. Got it. And then flip it over and do the same thing on the other end. Now where that one wrap right here is kind of not cooperating, There we go. If I lay that down on my leg, it helps, gives it a backing and lets those bristles get through there a little bit better. You see how quickly I got that to come out. All right, there's my pink, and now for the tan, I'm just going to go ahead and do this right down here on my leg. And there we go. Just lay that down on your pant leg and just brush it, brush it, brush it, and it comes right out. So that's prepped. We've got our hair prepped, and we've got our rib and legs ready to go. So let's get going on this thing. I'm going to start by beginning the thread, and I'm about 1.5 eye lengths back behind the eye of the hook. And then I'm going to lay a thin, even layer of thread all the way back. And I'm using the tag end at this point as kind of a guide, because when I wrap that thread right against that tag end, it pulls it up against the previous wrap of thread, and that gets that on there nice and even in a single layer. This is not super critical, but it does make the fly look a little cleaner. Now when I reach the hook point, I'm going to stop that. I broke my tag off and then make a spiral back to right into where the bend starts, and then I'm going to spiral back forward to the end of that solid thread base. And this is where I'm going to tie in the polar chenille. Now this polar chenille is going to do two things for us over that thread base. Number one, it's going to create the legs, and number two, it's also, once we put the solar res on it, it's going to create the illusion of segmentation. And that is going to save us a step later on, because I'm not going to have to go back and draw bars on the shrimp. Now you may prefer bars on there, and if you want to put the bars on there, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but just use a pink, orange, or gray, depending on the color of your fly, permanent marker. I use Sharpies or Copic. So let me see, I got a little lump there. Let's flatten that out. I want it nice and flat. And I'm going right back to my starting point. All right. Actually, I'm going to stop a little bit short at about 2 full hook eye lengths back. Now you can see this, the fibers on this polar chenille are pointing downward and back. That's the way I want them. Now when I start wrapping this, what that's going to do is going to make them easier for me to control. I don't want to get them caught underneath the center core of that, because I want to stroke them out of the way when we put the solar res on there in the next step. So I'm just brushing these back as I go. Don't need any moisture or anything, just kind of stroke them backwards and get up to where my thread is, and then I'm going to make one full wrap kind of right on top of itself. Get all those fibers back, work my thread through there to lock it down. Now that core of that polar chenille is locked down, so I can let it go back, stroke everything back, and make a few wraps right there on top of it where I made that last wrap. Cut that and get it out of the way. Now I'm going to build a taper, and this is going to be the foundation for the Cct fibers that create the body. And you see it's kind of like a little spearhead. It's got a really serious taper to it. And when we're wrapping the body, we don't ever want to come back beyond that widest point on that. And I'm going to let my thread hang right at the front of that and stroke all of this down here. Get it out of the way. Put my scissors down. And I'm going to take my Duro Finish Solarez. It's a thick and flex formula mixed together. And it's pretty hard, but it still has a little bit of flexibility to it. And I hope you can see that. I know my fingers are in the way, but I'm putting just a little bit right up to where my tapered thread base was. And I'm just going to hit that for a second. I'm going to stop, and you can see I've come to right here with the Solarez because I don't want to get that on my fingers. I'm going to stroke the rest of it down towards the back. And this does take a little bit of time to do this step, but it's worth it because this is the one thing I found that the Polar Chenille was the one thing that was a little bit delicate on this fly. It wasn't quite as durable as I wanted, and it tend to get caught in the teeth, especially like on a speckled trout, and then the fly is done and you've got to start over, and you've put all that time in this fly and it's no longer useful. I'm going to hit that again, and I'm doing this according to the instructions on the Solarez website, where it says when you put the resin on there, you want to hit it just for a second at a good distance, about 8 to 12 inches away, and then let it rest for about 15 seconds. Hit it for 1 second again and let it rest for about 15 seconds, and then go ahead and cook it. I'm going to rock that back and forth as I do. Notice I'm not looking into the light because that's UV light and you really don't want to do that. Too much of that, you're going to end up with some eye damage, just like looking into the sun. So now that I've got that cooked, it's a little bit uneven right here, and that's going to be the belly of the fly. So what I'm going to do is apply just a little bit more of this Duro Finish, just to kind of build it up. And again, I'm going right to where my thread base taper is, the tapered thread base. There we go. Now I'm going to turn that upside down, kind of let it sag a little bit, and then hit it with the light. Just for 1 long second. Let it sit. And then I'm going to hit it again. I'll come back to you once I've got that section cured, and we'll add the body in the back and the antenna. Now that I've got that Solarez completely cured, you can see, well, you can't really see it, but I'll tell you, it is very tack free. It's a nice solid surface, and that's going to make this Polar Chenille extremely durable. So now we're going to flip the fly over, and I'm going to put it in there in a little different position than you might be expecting, because I want to be able to get to this hook gap right here, and I would normally put it here, and it won't let me pull that Polar Chenille out of the way. I've used a wet sponge that I've got here on my bench to really wet those, dampen them, and it gets them out of the way for our next step when we're going to be trimming the Cct Fibers. I get that finger dry. So we've already got this white Cct. This is a single strand of Cct off the bundle. I've doubled it in half now. I hope you can see that. And then I'm going to cut it. Now, if you've seen some of my other videos, I have trimmed the ends of that before I put it on. But in this one, I'm going to show you even a different technique where I just leave them even. Pretty much even. I'm going to give it a little twist right here in the middle to contain it. Bring this under the hook and even up the ends. Grab them, put pressure on the bobbin, and make a couple of wraps, and that locks that in place. Let me even that up, and then I'm going to make 2 or 3 wraps back. Then I'm going to let those go. Take my little mustache or eyebrow grooming brush, brush those out so they'll flatten, and I've got half on one side of the hook and the other half on the other side of the hook. That's going to create a V, and I think you can see it right here. The way that those fibers are laid on there at about the 10 and 2 position on the hook shank. And that's very important to get the shape and action that we want out of this fly. Now, I've said it earlier and I'll say it again, do not go beyond the back of that tapered thread base when you're wrapping these, because what's going to happen is it'll push all of your materials downward, and we want them to go up and cover the point of the hook. That's going to do 2 things. It's going to make it weedless, and it's going to keep the fly swimming with the hook point up. If you get all your materials down here, it's going to flip, and then you're going to have an upside down shrimp. Now I'm going to take this and cut it at an angle like this. You won't be able to see it while I'm doing it, but I'll roll my vise around this way because this is the only way I can get to it. I can't get to it with it upright without throwing my wrist out of joint. Okay, there we go. Now you can see what I've done there. Created a taper at the back. Our next layer is the pink, and that's 2 bundles that I've brushed out. And this I am going to cut on the end. Flatten it out here. And then I'm going to cut it at a very extreme angle. I'm going to do it over my basket though, so those fibers aren't just flying around the room. Okay, so there you see what I've got. And I'm going to lay it on the back side of the hook to where the tip is just a little bit longer than the white. And then we're going to fold it around to the front. So I've got it right above the hook shank and on my side of the hook and slightly longer than the white CCT fibers. Lock it down there in front, and again this is on my side of the hook shank. I think you can see that right there, how it's up on now what would be the top as this is sitting at this moment. And then wrap back, and then I'm going to fold this other bundle down and around, and as I bring it around, let's see if I can do that without getting in the way. Down, around, bring the thread over, catch it right there, and then that's going to hold that exactly where I want it. Bring it back with thread wraps, and you see the angle that I'm holding it just under the hook barb. And I'm going to bring my thread right back up right behind the eye. Now let the tension off of that. Cut it just about the same length as that taper on the other side. Use my little brush, brush that, and then I'm going to do the same trimming. Again, swing my little wastebasket around here, because the less vacuuming I have to do later on, the happier I'll be. There we go. Now we're going to put the antenna on, and this is going to be 4 strands of bonefish tan crystal flash. And I like the 4 strands because I want to make sure that this fly has always got antenna, and if 1 or 2 of them break off, we've still got the antenna. I cut those right at the hank, and for this size 1 fly, I'm going to make the ends about 1 inch longer than where my material clip is on this Renzetti Master. In inches, that's about 4.5 to 5 inches. If I was doing a 1/0 fly, I would go even a little bit longer with those. I want those to be something that the fish can really see and key in on as a feature of the shrimp swimming through the water. Now for these butts over here, I'm going to take them and fold them over, and they're right dead center on top of the hook. I want them to stay right in the middle. Lock them in and bring my thread right back to the front again. There we go. Now the last layer is the tan Cct fibers. And I'm going to treat these exactly the same as I did the pink. Cut at an extreme angle. I'll cut that a little sharper. And again, they're going to be just a touch longer than the pink. I'll start with them on the back side of the hook. Gather it. And this is going to take you a little practice to really get used to before you just fly through these things. But I'm going to wrap this one a little bit different without as many wraps as I normally would, so that you can see that bundle of fiber is on one side of the hook. I'll bring this back forward, do my fold, catch. I'll try not to do so many wraps. There we go. Now I hope you can see that's two bundles that are sitting this way on the top of the hook shank. I'm going to go ahead and bind those down now. I want them solid, and I'm going to leave the thread hanging right there. Again, cut this right about the length of those. Brush that tan out. Now this time I've got the antenna to contend with, and I don't want to cut those. So just be careful coming in here, getting your taper. It doesn't have to be real precise. You just don't want a straight end on that, and that's going to create the silhouette that we're looking for. Now I'm going to tilt this up just a little bit, and this is about the angle that this fly swims through the water, and I hope you're starting to see the shrimp in it. Our last step before we finish the head is to put the back on, and that's the center bucktail. And I'm going to put just a dab of this Gorilla Super Glue on there. Before you take the top off, shake it down into the head, and then I give it a little shake over my bucket, and you'll see a little drop came out. Now I'm going to be able to control how much comes out just with a little tiny squeeze. Put that on there, and then just put the smallest little drop. Suck the rest of it back down into the bottle and put the cap on. If I'm production tying, I don't worry about putting the cap on every time, but since this is the only one I'm doing today, I'm going to do that. And I've got my hair. It's been stacked earlier. And you can see, except for that one right there, the ends are really dark on that. And once we gather all of those at the end here, you'll see how that kind of imitates the eye of a shrimp. Now I'm just kind of holding these over, measuring out the length that I want. And I want this, again, just like every stack of fibers, I want it to be just a little bit longer than the previous layer. Once I get that length figured out, trim those down. Now I'm going to hold these tight, and they're stacked top to bottom, up and down. Pull off about 2.5 to 3 inches of thread. Lay those down so all the tips are well behind the eye of the hook, and make 2 loose wraps pulling that down. Now you see what happened there when I pull that down is those butts kind of saddled around all that thread that's holding the other materials in place. And I'm going to pinch it like that, and I'm going to look down on it and make sure that everything is lined up. My length is good. I can see the fibers down below are just shorter than the dark spot on the end of the bucktail. And I've got everything in place. I'm going to pinch it again with my left hand and hold it in place really tight. Now don't pull downward. When you pull downward, what happens is it rotates that hair down around. Pull upward as you put pressure on it. Upward, and that'll keep from pulling that down and around the hook. Now before I finish that off, I'm going to look again, see what I've got. There we go. I like what I'm seeing. So let me give that just a little kink over. You can still do that at this point. Now I'm not going to wrap any more back here towards the back of that base, except just a couple of wraps to finish out the pink color. And when I do make those wraps, they're going to be fairly loose because I don't want to compress that hair downward, because like I said, it's going to push that all the materials down, and it's going to ruin the shape of your fly. It won't swim right, it won't fish right, and it may catch a fish, but it's just not going to be doing it the way that it's intended to do. Alright, whip finish that, and then I'm going to coat the head of the fly with my Duro Finish doming resin. We'll start by putting just a little dabble right here, right where the junction of the thread head and the hair is. Thin that out real good. And if you've got any problem with flaring, you can take the hair, pull it back, and hit that resin like that, and that will control that. But since this hair is not hollow, where I got it off of this particular bucktail, we're not going to have that problem. So I've got that contained, and at this point you can still manipulate that a little bit if you need to. But in the case of this one, I'm pretty happy with where it's at. So I'm going to go ahead and just lightly coat. I don't want a big bulbous head on this thing, so I'm squeezing a drop out and then spreading it around, and then just kind of let gravity do its thing. And right here at the bottom where the belly intersects with the head, I'm going to make sure that gap is filled. We'll spin that in a minute and it'll get everything in place. And right where I cut off my whip finish, there's a little tag of thread, which is going to make a little bump. If that bothers you, I'm going to show you how to deal with that once we get this partially cured. And I'm going to cure it again the same way I did the belly in little flashes, so that we don't overheat the resin and cause it to shrink or yellow or crack or craze. We want this resin to stay crystal clear, durable, and not shrink. So spin that a little bit just to get everything kind of evened out. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I do kind of like to not have it bulbous on one side. Alright, I'm going to let that sit for just a second. And while that sits and cools, I always keep a razor blade. This is half of a safety razor, broken in half. Keep it on a magnet on my vise for things like this, and With this Duro resin, because it's got some flex resin mixed in with it, if you need to, you can shave that like that. And you can see that knocked that little bulb off very easily. We've cooled. I'm going to cure that again. Just for a few seconds. And then while I'm waiting for that to cool off again, I'll show you what this fly is going to look like in the water. I'll put a bunch of moisture on there. And all that hair comes together. And this one. You can see right there at the tip of the bucktail where it's created a dark spot. That's going to imitate the eyes and the end of the carapace, whatever you call that shell right there at the head of the shrimp. This imitates the mouth parts. Here you've got your antenna, and then your legs are going to show at the polar chenille down here. And everything just kind of goes to town in the water. And the way this material is put on there in a V, when you stop that fly and it sinks, it will open up, and then when you move it, it's going to pulse just like this through the water. And that action will drive the fish crazy. I'm going to cure that one more time. Pardon me. I'll take this out of here and we'll have a good look at it. That's still going to get a little curing later on, but it's good for now. And if you want, you can put a little bone dry on the head, and that will make it even more durable. But if I take that, put it in the vise just like that, I'm going to brush these fibers down here a little bit. I've got a little too much water in those Cct fibers. There you go. And you can really see how that imitates the silhouette of a shrimp. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you tie a few of these, get them out on the flats, throw them at some redfish, speckled trout, even some drum. They will eat them. If you don't believe me, ask Nick, the Martian Ninja. You can see him on Instagram or Facebook at Nick Fly Fishing. Anyway, there it is, the Scimitar Shrimp. If you've got any questions or comments, just leave them in the comments section on the video. Until then, peace, love, and fly fishing, my friend.